We are carrying on our NHL offseason plan series. We're looking at the fifth best team from the regular season, the Pittsburgh Penguins. What will we expect from them this offseason? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we're reviewing and analyzing the Pittsburgh Penguins regular season and playoff run here and seeing what we should expect from them this offseason. As we know, they had a solid regular season, another disappointing playoffs, and we could be in store for some significant changes as we have a new GM and president of hockey operations trying to leave their mark on this team and see if they can take them to the next level. So let's take a look first and review the Pittsburgh Penguins regular season stats and cap space. We'll then look at their contracts that are expiring and talk about the 5 burning questions facing the Penguins this offseason. So as you can see, the Penguins had a really good year. They finished with a record of 37-16-3 for 77 points, finished first place and won their division, had a plus 40 goal differential, which again was really solid. Really good game from them at both ends of the ice all year long. Another really solid year of having a top power play in the NHL. 23.7% success rate for 4th best. Unfortunately, their penalty killing needs work and certainly let them down. 77.4% for 27th best is not going to cut it. They certainly need to cut that down and bring up certainly more of a higher percentage of success rate there. And as I mentioned, partway through the year, of course, we saw GM Jim Rutherford abruptly resign. And then we saw Ron Hextall come in as a new general manager, along with Brian Burke as the new president of hockey operations. And they did make some tweaks here at the deadline, but they're still likely to make more of their mark here on this team and make some more shakeups this offseason. Now, going into the offseason, the Penguins are in a really bad cap situation. They're actually slightly over. They're already into the negative for salary cap space. Now, of course, teams are allowed to be 10% over the cap in the offseason, so it's not a big deal right now, but considering they have players that need new contracts, it is going to be a problem, and there's likely going to be some moves and cap casualties here as a result of that. So now let's jump into the next segment where we take a look at the contract situation and see who's upcoming for restricted and unrestricted free agents. Now, the RFA list is not overly long, but certainly a few players here they'd probably like to keep around, but it includes Zach Aston-Reese, Teddy Bluger, and Mark Jankowski. Now, Jankowski, I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't get a qualifying offer, but Bluger and Aston-Reese likely will. On the UFA side of things, we have some names that, to be honest, I'm not sure that much of these guys come back, but certainly some question marks for Burke and Hextall in the offseason. Here we got Colton Seaver, Freddie Gaudreau, Evan Rodriguez, Cody Ceci. I could see Ceci possibly trying to come back. I can see he was a decent fit. Actually surprised me this year and how well he played. So I could see that being possible. They also have defenseman Yannick Weber as well as goaltender Maxime Lagacé. So thankfully they don't have a ton of contracts or players that are expecting like huge significant raises or anything like that. But they do have some guys there that need to be signed and they're already over. And the team needs to obviously do something a little bit different after 3 consecutive years of first round playoff losses without putting up a whole lot of a fight. This team, since they won the Stanley Cup in 2017, have been disappointing ever since. Now, of course, we have their core guys are getting a little bit older, and we have some questions that need to be answered. So let's dive into the 5 burning questions facing the Penguins this offseason. Burning question number 1, which is a common question and theme throughout many of these teams here in this offseason, is what goaltending tandem will be in place next year. Now, obviously, Tristan Jarry ran with the starting role for the bulk of the season. There were times when he was really good. There were times when he clearly was not, and had many people questioning if a change in goaltending was certainly necessary. Going into the playoffs, though, he actually had a solid finish to his year. But based on the playoffs, you could say he deserved his fair share of criticism for the loss in the first round. So to me, something needs to give here. Not rule out a Tristan Jarry trade, or at the very least, to bring in another goaltender to be a 1A, 1B situation with Jarry so that he does not have to play as much. They can continue to work with him and, maybe take the pressure off a little bit, for example. So hard to say what happens because they also have the expansion draft where they could lose a player, but I don't think we're going to see Jarry and DeSmith be the tandem next year. I think at least one of those two guys is going to be gone either via trade or expansion, and then we're going to see another probably veteran guy be brought in. Now, I know last offseason they were pushing really hard in trying to convince Vegas to trade Marc-Andre Fleury back to Pittsburgh. Now, to me, that's probably something that they might explore again, but probably unlikely. To me, we also have a new group of guys leading this team in the front office, which is likely to have some different opinions And as much as Fleury's played awesome this year, I don't think they'd be opposed to it. I think they're going to know well enough that that's not going to happen. So it wouldn't be shocking if they go down a different route and go after some players they might also be familiar with. For example, Jonathan Quick in LA. I don't know for sure that that's something they want to do, but just, obviously the connection to Ron Hextall and his time with the Kings organization. Obviously, there are other goalies out there as well. There's going to be a lot of goalie movement. And like I said, I'm not sure if Jerry gets moved or they bring in somebody to work with them. But either way, goaltending has to get better for next year for this team to take a step forward. Burning question number 2 is, how do you create some cap space and who are your most likely cap casualties? Because as I mentioned, they're already in a cap crunch and they haven't signed some of these players that need to come back or make moves to improve the team. So to me, if you look through this roster, the 2 players that make the most sense, you have one on the blue line and one in the forward group. Your blue liner is likely Marcus Pettersson, who has a longer-term contract, could be attractive to other teams, but he's fallen down the depth chart with Pittsburgh. I think fair to say probably fallen out of favor as well. I think we had surprisingly good seasons from guys like Matheson and Ceci, which certainly pushed their value up. You still got Letang, Dumoulin, and to me, Pettersson has become expendable. So given what he had for a longer-term contract from Jim Rutherford, he makes a lot of sense if they can find a way to move on from him. That'll create a roster spot on the back end and also free up some cap space. You got youngster John Marino going into his next contract as well, which is also, going to obviously part of the reason why they have so much money tied up for their cap currently as well. Now, the other guy in the forward group that makes sense is Jason Zucker. It's fair to say he's had his moments in Pittsburgh where he's looked really good, but overall, they're not getting enough production, in my opinion, to justify the contract, and he's making over $5 million. So it only makes sense they might find a new home for him as well. Now, clearly, this past year was not great for him. If you look at his whole time in Pittsburgh, it's just really, like I said, he's had his moments where he's looked good, but it hasn't really worked out the way they were hoping for. I know he was a guy they had their eye on for probably a year or more before they pulled off that trade, and things just haven't worked out the way they had hoped for. Move both these players and either get draft picks or other types of, futures-based compensation in return. You could free up about $10 million. That would be massive for the Penguins. So we'll see. Now, of course, both these players, if they're not traded, are likely made available through expansion as well. Hard to say how the Kraken feel about things, but clearly this Penguins team needs to shed money in the worst way. Now, question number 4 is certainly how do they handle expansion? Because ideally, I think these are players they'd probably like to trade ahead of time. If they can move at least one of them, and if the other one's still there, maybe they get plucked in expansion. But another situation that we talked about earlier is they could lose a goalie. So Casey DeSmith would be the likely one available here. So to me, that might be an option for Ron Francis and the Seattle Kraken as well. I mean, to me, if you're looking at taking a longer-term contract of $4 or $5 million, or you have a potential promising younger goaltender, you probably take the goaltender. You don't want too much money tied up on your cap right off the bat if you're Seattle. So to me, those contracts might not be the most enticing to take. So clearly, that's some options there because they do have some other players. You might even possibly end up losing a guy like Jared McCann. It really boils down to the protection list. Adding Jeff Carter at the deadline worked out really, really well, but it also adds another piece that's still under contract that you need to protect. So if you look at going 7-3-1, clearly, Malkin and Crosby are getting protected. You know that 100%. You've obviously have Brian Rust up there. He's going to be protected. You get Jake Gensel. So now we're at 4. You throw in Jeff Carter at 5. And then you have some other players that, are questionable. Like, for example, Jason Zucker, if he's still there. You've obviously got, Teddy Bluger, who's another younger player as well. Jared McCann. Somebody from that group is going to be made available. So obviously, they're going to lose a player in that regard, and it's hard to say exactly what kind of relief they get from it. So we'll see, but they have some options here. It could go in a variety of ways. It's not really clear-cut exactly what they're going to do because it really boils down to what trades they make ahead of time. And the number 5 burning question for me, which is also a pretty important and big question here, is do you extend Evgeny Malkin? He's entering the final year of his contract. Now, to me, I don't have any doubt they want him to retire as a Penguin. I mean, we've heard numerous reports that ownership has made that perfectly clear, and I think it's fair to say that Crosby and Malkin and Letang, to that degree, want to retire as Penguins as well. I've seen some reports saying that Malkin would only ever consider playing for Florida if he left Pittsburgh because he lives there in the offseason. Maybe, but I don't think we really have any reason to think that. I think Malkin loves being a Pittsburgh Penguin and has loved his time there winning Stanley Cups, and both those guys, Crosby and Malkin, want to retire as Penguins. But Crosby still has time in his contract, so there's time to figure that out in the future. But for Malkin, one more year. So do you wait, let it ride out, and have a situation like you have with Ovechkin right now? It wouldn't be shocking if it was, because I don't think they feel threatened to lose him. So they could let it see how the season goes, figure out what he wants to do, and go from there. Now, to me, you do try to extend him, whether it's in the offseason, beginning of the season, before the season ends. You want to have him finish out his time there. He can still be a dominant player, but Malkin's biggest issue is staying healthy. If you look back at his record, as much as he's been a solid player, one of the top players in the league, Evgeny Malkin has not played a full 82-game schedule since 08-09. We're 2021 now. That's a long time. Now, I realize you could look at a couple of those seasons and say that, there were, different schedules because of, different situations that have come up, especially like with COVID the last 2 years. But still, he misses games every year, and he tends to miss them in large amounts. So, obviously, that means that his body has a ton of miles on it, a ton of wear and tear, and you have to have concern. So, yes, you want to keep him, but what kind of money does it take? I mean, when you're making over $9 million now, you can't really afford to do that at the tail end of his career. So you try to extend them, you work it out. Obviously, you have to bring that number down to make it more reasonable, but I'm not sure what kind of money Malkin is going to want here. I mean, he might feel that there were parts of his career that he was underpaid too, because Crosby could say the same thing. They took those long-term contracts. Yes, they were well paid, but we saw times where the cap increased and other guys that weren't necessarily as good or as dominant made as much or more money than him. So I don't know what you do here, but I think you have to start having conversations about how long do you think you want to play? How do you feel when it comes to your health? What do you want to do? And try to get something figured out to make sure he retires here as a Pittsburgh Penguin. But he's an important piece if you're going to try to continue to contend here. And we know that Burke and Hextall will be trying to do everything they can to continue to push for Stanley Cups and the playoffs as long as Malkin and Crosby are on this roster, which could be for still a while yet. So let me know your thoughts for the Pittsburgh Penguins. What do you expect for them in this offseason? We'll discuss further down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on all 32 NHL teams. And of course, stay tuned for the remaining videos coming soon here in this series as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.